You're worthless. I don't need you anymore, worthless woman. Derek's voice echoed through our living room in Fort Wayne, Indiana, as he threw my suitcase down the front steps. I stood there, stunned, watching 15 years of marriage crumble in the span of 10 minutes. My face was still hot from the tears I'd been shedding since he'd started packing my belongings with the enthusiasm of someone finally getting rid of unwanted clutter. My name is Joanna, and at 42 years old, I never imagined I'd find myself homeless because my husband had suddenly decided he was too good for me. Theodore, his father, had passed away just 3 days earlier, and Derek was already acting like he owned the world. I'm rich now, Joanna. $75 million, Derek shouted, his face flushed with excitement as he stood in our doorway. I don't need some waitress dragging me down anymore. I'm gonna live like a king. The cruelty in his voice cut deeper than any physical blow could have. For 15 years, I had worked double shifts at Miller's Diner to keep us afloat, while Derek bounced between part-time jobs, claiming he was finding himself or waiting for the right opportunity. I had paid our mortgage, bought our groceries, and even covered his car payments when his employment was inconsistent, which was most of the time. Derek, please, I whispered, my hands shaking as I picked up the suitcase. We've been together for 15 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? He laughed, a harsh sound that made my stomach turn. It means I wasted 15 years being held back by someone who wasn't good enough for me. Theodore always knew I'd amount to something great. That's why he left me everything. As I stood on the sidewalk, watching him close the door of what had been our home, I felt something inside me break. But it wasn't just heartbreak. There was something else brewing. A tiny voice in the back of my mind whispered that Derek might be celebrating a little too early. Theodore had always been kind to me, often more so than his own son, and I had spent countless hours caring for him in his final months, while Derek complained about the burden. The relationship with Theodore had been one of the few bright spots in my marriage. While Derek treated his father like an inconvenience, I had genuinely cared for the old man. After Theodore's first stroke 2 years ago, I was the one who drove him to physical therapy appointments when Derek was too busy playing video games. I cooked his favorite meals, helped him with his medication, and spent hours listening to his stories about building his construction empire from nothing. You're a good woman, Joanna, Theodore had told me just a week before he passed. We were sitting on his back porch, watching the sunset while Derek was inside, probably on his phone. You remind me of my wife, God rest her soul. She had the same kindness in her heart. I had smiled and patted his weathered hand. You don't need to thank me, Theodore. Your family. The old man had looked at me with those sharp blue eyes that age hadn't dimmed. Family isn't always about blood, dear. Sometimes it's about who shows up when it matters. At the time, I thought it was just the wisdom of an elderly man reflecting on life. I never imagined those words would prove prophetic. Derek's attitude toward his father's declining health had been embarrassing. He complained constantly about the smell of medications, the inconvenience of medical appointments, and the way Theodore's presence cramped his style. More than once, I caught Derek rolling his eyes when his father struggled with simple tasks or needed help getting around. Why can't he just go to one of those homes? Derek had grumbled to me after Theodore had a particularly difficult day following his second stroke. I didn't sign up to be a caregiver. He's your father, I had replied, shocked by his callousness. And this is his house. We're living here because he invited us to stay after you lost your job at the warehouse. Derek had shrugged, already turning his attention back to his phone. Whatever. Once he's gone, this place will be mine anyway. Then we can do whatever we want with it. The memory of that conversation now felt like a premonition. Theodore had witnessed his son's indifference and had clearly drawn his own conclusions about Derek's character. I remembered the way the old man's face had fallen when Derek made those comments, though he never said anything directly. Now, as I sat in my car in the parking lot of a budget motel, staring at the $43 in my wallet, I wondered if Theodore had seen something in those final months that the rest of us had missed. The funeral had been a small affair. Theodore hadn't had many close friends left, and Derek's behavior during the service had been shameful. Instead of mourning his father, Derek kept checking his phone and whispering to his brother Calvin about what they thought the inheritance would be worth. I heard Dad's construction company was valued at $60 million last year, Calvin had whispered during the eulogy, plus the house, the land, and all those investments. Derek had grinned like a child on Christmas morning. I'm thinking of buying a boat first, maybe one of those big yachts I saw in Miami. I had been mortified by their behavior, but I was even more disturbed by something else I noticed. Vincent Rodriguez, Theodore's estate lawyer, kept glancing at Derek with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't grief or sympathy. It was something closer to disapproval, mixed with what looked like anticipation. After the service, Vincent approached me with genuine warmth. Joanna, I'm so sorry for your loss. Theodore spoke about you often. He was very fond of you. Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. He was a wonderful man. I'm going to miss him terribly. Vincent nodded, then glanced over at Derek, who was already discussing vacation plans with Calvin. The will reading is scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. Please make sure you're there. Something in his tone made me pause. Me? Derek said the lawyer told him it was just for family members. Vincent's expression darkened slightly. Theodore specifically requested that you attend. In fact, he insisted on it. That conversation had stuck with me for the 3 days since the funeral. Derek had been so confident about his inheritance that he'd already started making plans. He'd called a real estate agent about selling Theodore's house, contacted a luxury car dealer about trading in his old pickup truck, and even started looking at expensive condos in downtown Indianapolis. But there had been something in Vincent's manner that suggested Derek's confidence might be misplaced. The lawyer had looked at Derek the same way a teacher might look at a student who hadn't studied for an important test. As I sat in that motel room, eating a sandwich from the gas station next door, I found myself thinking about all the small moments I'd shared with Theodore. The way he'd smile when I brought him his morning coffee. How he'd insist on paying for groceries when I drove him to the store. The times he'd tell me stories about his late wife, and how much I reminded him of her. Derek doesn't deserve you, Theodore had said once, when Derek had been particularly dismissive of my work at the diner. A man should appreciate a woman who works as hard as you do. Now, facing an uncertain future with almost no money to my name, I clung to those words like a lifeline. Maybe Thursday would bring more heartbreak, but something deep inside me whispered that it might bring something else entirely. Thursday arrived with the kind of gray, dreary weather that seemed to match my mood. I had spent the previous night at the Comfort Inn, using the last of my credit card availability to pay for the room. Derek hadn't called once to check on me, and when I'd tried calling him to discuss practical matters like our joint bank accounts, he'd sent me straight to voicemail. Vincent Rodriguez's law office was in a restored Victorian house downtown, with polished hardwood floors and walls lined with legal books. The waiting room smelled like leather and old paper, and classical music played softly from hidden speakers. It was the kind of place that suggested both tradition and serious money. Derek arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a new suit that he must have bought with money from our joint account. He walked in with the swagger of someone who believed he was about to become incredibly wealthy. Calvin was with him, both of them barely containing their excitement. "Sorry I'm late," Derek announced to the room, not sounding sorry at all. "I was on the phone with a yacht broker in Florida. Gotta start planning how to spend all this money, right?" He glanced at me sitting in the corner and his expression shifted to mild annoyance. "What's she doing here? This is family business." Vincent Rodriguez emerged from his office before I could respond. He was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of steady presence that inspired confidence. "Derek, Calvin, Joanna, thank you all for coming. Please follow me into the conference room." The conference room was dominated by a large mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs. Vincent took his place at the head of the table, and opened a thick folder. Derek and Calvin sat on one side, while I took a chair across from them. The distance felt symbolic somehow. "Before we begin," Vincent said, adjusting his glasses, "I want to make sure everyone understands that this reading will proceed exactly as Theodore specified in his will. There will be no interruptions, no questions until I'm finished, and no disputes until the document has been read in its entirety." Derek leaned forward eagerly. "Whatever you say, Mr. Rodriguez. I'm ready to hear about my inheritance." Something in Vincent's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Derek, before we proceed, I have to ask, did you bother reading the copy of the will that was sent to you last week?" Derek waved his hand dismissively. "I skimmed it. All that legal language is confusing. I figured you'd explain everything today. Besides, I know Dad left everything to me. I'm his son." Vincent's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. And you, Calvin?" Calvin shrugged. "Same here. Derek said it was all just formalities anyway." Vincent looked directly at me. "Joanna, did you receive a copy?" I shook my head. "Derek told me I didn't need to see it because it didn't concern me." For a moment, Vincent's professional composure cracked, and I saw something that looked like anger flash across his features. "That's unfortunate, because it concerns you very much indeed." The room fell silent. Derek's confident smile faltered slightly, while Calvin shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I felt my heart begin to race, though I couldn't say exactly why. Vincent opened the folder and withdrew a thick document with official seals and ribbons. "The last will and testament of Theodore James Harrison," he announced formally. "Dated March 15th of this year." March 15th. That was just 2 months ago, well after Theodore's second stroke. My mind began to race, trying to remember what had been happening in our lives at that time. That was around when Derek had made his comment about putting Theodore in a nursing home, and when I'd started spending even more time caring for the old man. "Let's begin," Vincent said, and something in his tone suggested that nothing would ever be the same after the next few minutes. Vincent cleared his throat and began reading from the official document. "I, Theodore James Harrison, being of sound mind and body, do hereby set forth my last will and testament. To my son, Derek Harrison, who has shown little appreciation for hard work or family loyalty, I leave the sum of $5,000 and my grandfather's fishing equipment, stored in the garage." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Derek's face went from confident anticipation to confusion to growing horror as the reality began to sink in. "Wait, what? That can't be right. $5,000? There has to be a mistake." Vincent held up his hand for silence and continued reading. "To my son, Calvin Harrison, who moved to California and visits perhaps twice a year, I leave $10,000 and my collection of vintage tools, with the hope that he might finally learn the value of building something with his own hands." Calvin's mouth fell open, but he seemed too stunned to speak. Derek, however, was beginning to panic. "This is impossible. I'm his son, his heir. Where's the rest of it? The $75 million? The company? The house?" Vincent's expression remained professionally neutral, but I could see satisfaction in his eyes. "If you had read the will as instructed, Derek, you would know that there is much more to be read. The bulk of the estate, Harrison Construction Company, valued at approximately $62 million, the family home and surrounding property, valued at $8 million, plus all liquid assets, investments, and personal property, totaling approximately $5 million, goes to someone else entirely." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Derek looked like he was about to be sick, his face pale and his hands shaking. "To Joanna Marie Harrison," Vincent continued, and my world tilted on its axis. "Who has shown more love, loyalty, and dedication to me in 15 years than my own blood relatives have shown in a lifetime? I leave the entirety of my remaining estate." The silence in the room was deafening. I felt like I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I was hearing. Derek made a strangled sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Theodore wrote a personal letter to accompany this bequest, Vincent said, withdrawing another document from the folder. He asked that I read it aloud. Vincent unfolded the letter, and I recognized Theodore's careful handwriting on the cream-colored stationery. "My dear Joanna," he began, "if you are hearing this, then I have passed on, and you are learning for the first time that I have chosen to leave my life's work to you, rather than to my sons. This decision was not made lightly, nor was it made in anger. It was made with careful observation and deep consideration of who truly embodies the values that built Harrison Construction Company." Derek tried to interrupt, but Vincent continued reading without acknowledging him. "For 15 years, I watched you work multiple jobs to support my son while he chose leisure over labor. I watched you care for me in my illness with genuine compassion, while Derek complained about the inconvenience. I watched you treat our home with respect, while Derek saw it only as something to be sold for profit. Most importantly, I watched you demonstrate every day the qualities of character that I spent my lifetime trying to instill in my sons: kindness, integrity, dedication, and humility." By now, Derek was hyperventilating, and Calvin looked like he was in shock. But Vincent wasn't finished reading the letter. Vincent continued with Theodore's letter, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Joanna, you may wonder why I never spoke to you about this decision. The truth is, I wanted to observe how Derek treated you when he believed inheritance was certain. His behavior these past months, and particularly his treatment of you following my death, has only confirmed that I made the right choice." Derek suddenly lurched to his feet, knocking his chair backward. "This is insane. She's not even blood family. You can't just give away my inheritance to some waitress." Vincent's voice turned ice cold. "Sit down, Derek, or I'll have security escort you from the premises. Your father's will is legally binding, properly witnessed, and completely valid." Derek collapsed back into his chair, his face red and streaked with tears. "There has to be something I can do. I'll contest it. I'll prove he wasn't in his right mind." "I anticipated that response," Vincent replied calmly. Theodore underwent a complete psychological evaluation just weeks before signing this will. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the psychiatrist who conducted the evaluation, found him to be completely competent and clear-minded. Her report is part of the permanent record. He returned to the letter. "Joanna, I hope you will use this inheritance wisely. Harrison Construction Company employs 43 people, and they are good people who deserve security. The company is profitable and well managed by my foreman, Robert Patterson, who has been with us for 22 years. I trust you will keep him on and learn the business gradually." I found my voice for the first time since the reading began. "Mr. Rodriguez, I don't understand. How could Theodore have known that Derek would treat me the way he did?" Vincent set down the letter and looked at me with gentle eyes. "Theodore called me the day after he passed. He was still alive then, barely, but he was alert. He told me that Derek had already begun making plans to sell the house and had spoken cruelly to you about your future together. He asked me to make sure you attended this reading, knowing that Derek would likely try to exclude you." The room spun around me as the full magnitude of what had happened began to sink in. Theodore had not only witnessed Derek's true nature, but had planned this moment with the precision of a military operation. "There's more," Vincent said, returning to the letter. "Derek, if you are hearing this, know that I still love you as my son, but love alone cannot excuse a lifetime of taking advantage of others. Perhaps losing what you never truly earned will teach you the value of work and the importance of treating people with respect. Calvin, the same applies to you, though your sins are more of neglect than cruelty." Derek was openly sobbing now, the reality of his situation finally hitting home. He had thrown away a marriage and revealed his true character, all while unknowingly destroying his chances at the inheritance he'd been so confident about receiving. Vincent folded the letter and looked around the table. The will includes one final instruction. Joanna, Theodore has left you a sealed envelope that was to be given to you privately after the reading. Derek and Calvin, your inheritances will be distributed within 30 days, as required by law. The bulk of the estate transfer to Joanna will take several weeks to complete, but it is legally binding as of today. As Derek continued to sob and Calvin sat in stunned silence, I realized that my life had just changed completely. The woman who had been thrown out of her home 3 days ago was now the owner of a multi-million-dollar empire. But more than that, I had been validated by a man who had seen the worth in me that my own husband had refused to acknowledge. The revenge was complete, and Derek had orchestrated his own downfall with every cruel word and dismissive action. The aftermath of Vincent's revelation was swift and devastating for Derek. As the lawyer explained the immediate legal ramifications, Derek's world crumbled with each passing minute. The house he'd planned to sell wasn't his. The company he'd expected to inherit now belonged to the woman he'd called worthless. The $75 million he'd bragged about to friends and strangers alike had been a fantasy built on arrogance and entitlement. "I need to speak with Joanna privately," Vincent announced as Derek continued to sob into his hands. "Derek, Calvin, you're free to go. Someone from my office will contact you about collecting your inherited items." Derek looked up with desperate, red-rimmed eyes. "Joanna, please, you have to understand. I didn't mean what I said. I was just upset about Dad dying. We can work this out, can't we? We're still married." The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. 3 days ago, he'd been eager to throw me away like garbage. Now that I controlled his father's fortune, he was begging for reconciliation. I looked at this man I'd supported for 15 years, who had shown his true colors the moment he thought he no longer needed me. "Derek," I said quietly, "you made it very clear that you don't need me anymore. You said I was worthless. You threw my belongings on the lawn and slammed the door in my face. Theodore saw who you really were, and frankly, so did I." His face contorted with panic and rage. "This isn't over. I'll fight this in court. I'll prove you manipulated him somehow." Vincent Rodriguez stepped between us. "Derek, I strongly advise against making threats. Your father's will is ironclad, and any attempt to contest it will only result in expensive legal fees you can no longer afford. You might want to focus on finding employment instead." Derek and Calvin left the office in devastation, their dreams of easy wealth shattered by their own character flaws. Through the conference room window, I watched Derek stumble toward his truck, a broken man who had destroyed his own future through greed and cruelty. Vincent handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Theodore's familiar handwriting. "He wanted you to read this privately," he said, then quietly left me alone in the conference room. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "My dear Joanna," it began. "If you are reading this, then justice has been served, and Derek has received the shock he so richly deserved. I want you to know that my decision to make you my heir was not a punishment for Derek, though he will surely see it that way. It was recognition of your true worth." Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. "You spent 15 years being undervalued and taken for granted by my son. You worked yourself to exhaustion to support a man who contributed nothing to your partnership. You cared for me in my final months with a tenderness that came from your heart, not from obligation. You are the daughter I never had, and the person most deserving of the life my money can provide." The letter concluded with practical advice about managing the construction company and a suggestion that I consider establishing a foundation to help women in situations similar to what I'd endured. Use this gift to build the life you deserve, and perhaps to help other women find their own worth. As I folded the letter, I felt a profound sense of closure. Theodore had not only secured my future, but had validated every sacrifice I'd made during my marriage to Derek. His final act had been one of justice, recognizing true character over blood relations. I walked out of that law office no longer as Derek's discarded wife, but as the owner of Harrison Construction Company, and the architect of my own destiny. The revenge had been served not by me, but by a man who had observed, judged, and acted with the precision of someone who understood the true meaning of justice. Derek faced complete financial and social ruin in the weeks following the will reading. His premature celebration of an inheritance he never actually received became the subject of cruel gossip throughout Fort Wayne, as word spread that Theodore had deliberately chosen his daughter-in-law over his own son. Derek's attempt to contest the will failed spectacularly when the court reviewed Theodore's psychiatric evaluation and multiple witness testimonies about Derek's treatment of both his wife and his dying father. With only $5,000 to his name and no employable skills after years of depending on others, Derek was forced to move into his mother's basement apartment while facing the mockery of former friends who had watched him boast about wealth that was never his. His reputation was permanently destroyed, and potential employers invariably learned about the man who had been so worthless that his own father left millions to his ex-wife instead. 6 months later, as I signed the papers establishing the Theodore Harrison Foundation for Women's Independence, I smiled, knowing that his final gift had been more than financial security. It had been the recognition that my years of dedication and sacrifice had been noticed and valued by someone who truly mattered. Looking back on the journey from worthless castaway to empowered businesswoman, I understood that the best revenge had been allowing Derek to reveal his true character, while Theodore watched and judged accordingly.